Hello, my name is Lee Presser. This is my show. I speak frequently to very interesting people. Some of these conversations are so exciting, so intellectually stimulating, I thought others might like to listen in. This is the reason we started recording Conversation with Lee Presser.
Welcome to Conversation with Lee Presser. My guest today is Congressman Rodney Davis. Mr. Davis represents the Illinois 13th Congressional District in the 114th Congress. He represents a portion of the St. Louis Metro East area, including part of Collinsville, part of Maryville, Glen Carbon, Edwardsville, SIUE, northern parts of Alton, and Godfrey. From Metro East, his district proceeds eastward to Champaign County, containing all or parts of 14 counties. Congressman Davis serves on the House Agriculture Committee, where he was appointed the chairman of the House Agriculture Subcommittee on Biotechnology, Horticulture, and Research. He's also a member of the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee and the House Administration Committee. Prior to his election as a congressman, Mr. Davis served as projects director for Congressman John Shimkus. Today is my pleasure to introduce the congressman from Taylorville, Illinois. Rodney Davis, welcome to Conversation.
Thanks for having me back.
I'm very glad to have you here. You've always been a very interesting guest, and you have very interesting things to say, which is why, and this is a show about ideas, and you talk about ideas, so that's why you're here. Some politicians come here and want to just talk about stuff that is not worth talking about, and they don't come back. Let's get to the very hard part first. Well, maybe it's not so hard for you. Last week, today is July the 26th, 2016. Last week, the Republicans had their national convention where they picked Donald Trump as the nominee. Do you plan to support your nominee for president?
Absolutely. I was in Cleveland. I saw the convention. This was the third convention I attended and was the most calm convention out of all three of them. There were less protesters, ironically, in Cleveland, even though the media built it up as a protest, it was supposed to be a protest a minute. And it was a very well-run convention. And I think what you're seeing now about the reports in Philadelphia, logistics and also protest-wise, and then couple that with the lack of unity that we saw on their opening day in their convention, I think that Republican convention really gave a boost to our nominee and also to the party itself.
I'm going to make a few personal remarks here, then we're going to go on. I spoke to a police officer who's from the Cleveland area, not Cleveland itself. He said that during the entire convention there was a total of 26 convention-related arrests, which is less than a single day of what Cleveland normally arrests people for. So you're absolutely right. There was almost no arrestable events. There were barely any protesters that were in Cleveland, and the police chief there is to be given a big hand because he handled that whole scenario very, very well.
And can I say something on that?
Go right ahead.
The police chief, I actually met him. He was walking around the convention crowd during the day to talk about what they've done to prepare in Cleveland.
Playing ping pong.
He
riding bikes.
Out there. The Cleveland community, as much fun as we made of Cleveland being selection with my colleagues from Ohio, that city is beautiful. That city was well prepared for this convention, and their law enforcement officers were top notch. As a matter of fact, I wanted to take a shortcut on Wednesday of the convention, and I walked right through the protesters. And there were more TV cameras and media there in that protest area than there were protesters.
Now, yesterday, I had some time, and I watched the convention on C-SPAN, which I found to be a much better way to watch the conventions because you don't get the interruptions. You actually get to hear all the speeches, and you can make decisions for yourself as to what you're seeing and what you're hearing. They started about 3:00 p.m. On C-SPAN, and in the first few hours, the convention was, I mean, not just raucous, it was completely out of control to the point where Congresswoman Fudge from Ohio was so angry that she didn't quite say it this way, but she looked out there at that crowd and it was like, I'm a congressman and you're going to respect me, because she was so infuriated by the way that she was being treated as the chairwoman of the convention. And yet, when I went and looked at the ABC, CBS, NBC, MSNBC, CNN sites that evening, I didn't see a word, not one word, as opposed to the description of the way the Republican convention was reported as out of control, raucous, boy oh boy, those cruisers were just going nuts.
Yeah, it's sad the way you see the difference in reporting of the facts, and the facts were patently clear yesterday at the opening day of the convention, where you had that disunity. I like to watch it on C-SPAN too, because you do get the truest form of the convention itself, and you can see what's happening throughout the entire day. I almost missed one of my colleagues, who's actually a friend of mine, Joe Kennedy from Massachusetts.
Oh, yes,
he introduced
nice.
Senator Warren,
yes.
and I watched him do that on C-SPAN. I would have missed it if I would have turned to another channel, because they preempted him.
Right.
And I texted him, I said, Joe, hey, as much as I disagree with Senator Warren on all these issues and didn't want to hear her, you did a fine job introducing her. Those are the types of things that I would encourage your viewers to do, is get to the meat of the subject. Go to channels like C-SPAN, where you're going to see that convention. And what we saw last night, outside of the First Lady's speech, which was phenomenal, was disunity before that, unity during that, and disunity after that. And I think we're going to see that as this convention moves forward, which I think bodes very well for our Republican nominee.
That's what Republicans are hoping anyways. Now, speaking of Mrs. Obama's speech, she had a line in there that when I heard it, I went like, what? What? Now, I don't want to take away from the wonderful parts of her speech, but she said, make no mistake about it, this November when we get to the polls, that is what we are deciding, not Democrat, not Republican, not left, right. In this election and every election, it's about who will have the power to shape our children for the next 4 or 8 years of their lives. Now, would you comment on that, please?
Yeah, I'm not surprised by that comment, because Mrs. Obama... Is
that the job of the president, the first lady, or the federal government to shape children in the United States for 4 or 8 years?
I don't believe so. Her and I share a different philosophy in raising kids. I believe that the responsibility of raising my children is up to me, my wife, and our family. But she has shown over the last 7.5 years that she wants to take the First Lady's position and turn that into a position of advocacy on behalf of what she believes is our school children, our families. Look, I have fought her personally, tooth and nail, when it comes to some of the policies that were implemented in our school cafeterias. And I talk to the cafeteria workers who are frustrated. I talk to the students who are frustrated.
What are they frustrated about?
They're frustrated because the federal government chooses what types of food can now be served in our school cafeterias. And it's not just about getting healthy foods to our kids. We all want that. The school lunches today, compared to when we were in school, are much, much healthier. But when you have the federal government through the USDA telling our cafeteria workers that it was okay you serve that yellow vegetable on Monday, but now you've got to serve this green vegetable like kale or Brussels sprouts, but you can't put any salt on it. I mean, what kids are going to eat it? Schools are wasting a lot of dollars by having food go to the trash can. And that's that top-down approach that Mrs. Obama has personally been pushing over the last 7.5 years. So I'm not surprised by that comment, because that's exactly the type of First Lady and the First Lady's advocacy that I've seen as a member of Congress.
Now, the president, the current president, has used a number of executive orders in order to enact some things that he wants to have happen. Members of the Republican Party have pointed that out as very dictatorial. First of all, do you agree that executive orders that have been issued by President Obama, we're talking about President Obama, have been an overreach of presidential executive power?
Absolutely, they've been an overreach.
Now explain to the audience why you believe that and what normal executive orders are supposed to do.
Yeah, normal executive orders are to address issues that are not policy related. You know, they should be something where there's a clarification to an existing law or clarification to an existing policy that had already been in place. And what this president has done is tried to legislate through the regulatory and rulemaking process via executive orders. This president has time and time again lost at the ballot box when it comes to who's in charge of the legislative process. We are the majority. Republicans are the majority in Washington. And what he's done is push his political agenda, like the Clean Power Plan that's going to kill some of the best paying jobs in my district at coal-fired power plants. That's already beginning to kill the coal mining industry, which is some of the best paying jobs that we have in the northern part of my district too. This is all done by executive order because he knows we will stop it in Washington, D.C. Now we're left having to fight the rulemaking process rather than fight something legislatively, and that's wrong. It's an overreach, and we need to stop it no matter who the president is.
Now, the Constitution is set up where Article 1, the very first article, is the legislature. And those that wrote the Constitution spent the vast amount of time at the convention talking about Article 1. They had some time where they talked about Article 2 and very little time where they talked about the Supreme Court, which is kind of an afterthought. They did not, according to what I read in the Constitution, intend for a president to be able to simply dictate policy, that he was there as an enforcer of the things that the Article 1 branch said was legal and needed to be done. But I have noticed that it's not just President Obama. Over the last number of presidencies, Congress has not been jealous of its prerogatives. You guys have let these things just slip through your fingers by the way that legislation is written, enacting and allowing the executive branch to interpret and to execute to their standards as opposed to the Congress's standards.
Well, that's part of the executive branch's responsibility, is to take the laws that we write and write the implementation rules. During that process, we can have concerns about that, what our legislative intent is going to be. And I'll give you one example. In the Farm Bill of 2014, 2 years ago, I wrote a provision into it to force the EPA with their Science Advisory Board to create a committee, a standing committee to deal with agriculture issues. Remember, Lee, not too long ago during this administration, they wanted to regulate milk spills like oil spills. And I always joke.
I hadn't heard that.
Yeah, oh yeah, they did. And I joke that, I always ask the question, which one can you clean up with cats? Well, the idea behind having this agriculture standing committee on the Science Advisory Board is so that somebody in production agriculture can sit around that table. People that grow up here that work in our ag community could raise their hand when somebody in a concrete building in Washington, D.C. comes up with a crazy idea like that and says, which one can you clean up with cats? And then they realize, oh yeah, maybe that's not something that's logical. Not a single person has been appointed to that standing committee by the EPA, even though I have personally told Administrator McCarthy what my legislative intent was. This executive branch, no matter what the Constitution says, no matter what our laws say, they disdain it, they disdain us, and it's wrong, which is why we need a change in administration so badly.
Okay. Of course, the power of the purse, if you were to write more detailed, either this gets done or on such and such day number, where you lost this money. Well, like the administrator's salary.
Yeah, well, ironically, just 2 weeks ago, when we were debating our Interior and EPA appropriations bill, the House Ag Committee had 30-plus pages of questions that we submitted, Republicans and Democrats, after Administrator McCarthy left a hearing, and we got nothing out of the Office of Congressional Affairs at the EPA. I passed an amendment to their appropriations that zeroed out the Office of Congressional Affairs. So it zeroed out their funding. And it passed without any Democrat opposition, passed by voice vote. So we're doing those things. The problem we have is that we have a lot of people in our own party that don't understand the appropriations process, let alone the other side, which has no desire to use that process.
See, that's just it. You know, it's like every time I hear people rioting and protesting about their government, I say, look in the mirror. You're the guys that put them in there. If you voted. If you didn't vote, then you still put them in there through lack of participation. But it's up to us, the citizens, to make sure that qualified people are there. If there are people who don't even understand the process, what the heck are they in the United States Congress doing anyways, just because they look pretty?
Well, it's unfortunate, but the political rhetoric has been at the level of what I would consider the 30,000-foot level. It's repeal Obama, or defund Obamacare.
Right.
Well, you really can't defund
guns, abortion.
You can't defund Obamacare because it's ingrained in all of our medical systems. We have to repeal the language that created it and replace it with something else that's going to give us a better way toward health care in this country. And you get a lot of folks that come to Congress that only want to talk about those issues and not want to talk about governing. And when we talk about regaining the power of the purse, the only way to do that is to get back to our constitutional appropriations process.
Yes.
That has not happened in its entirety the entire Obama administration. Remember, there are people that have been serving in Washington a lot longer than me now that have never seen us really gain the power of the purse back.
Well, if you guys insist on going forward and not just stopping and following the Constitution, then before you know it, it won't even be expected anymore. We may be to that point already where it's not even expected that you're going to follow, what do they call it, normal order?
Regular order. Yeah.
Regular order.
A lot of people have a different definition of regular order, and they got to be willing to lose. Look, I offered my amendment. I was more than willing to stand up there and lose that vote. I would have had Republicans probably vote against it, and I don't care. But let me have a chance to offer it. Let me have a chance to make my point. And too many times that I've seen in my 3 years that I've been there, people don't want to take that chance. They don't want to do what I would consider the heavy lifting, the tough legislating that it takes to get back to that regular order. Mm-hmm. And when we do that, then we can really regain the power of the purse. But talking about these issues makes people's eyes glaze over. Mm-hmm. And people say, well, what about it?
That's why you're there.
Yeah, exactly.
You're paid, what is it, 170 grand or something like that? If you don't want to, not you, if you, Mr. Congressman or Mrs. Congressman, don't want to do the job, then don't do the job. Give it to somebody who actually wants to not glaze over and actually takes it seriously.
Legislating is a very tedious business, especially in a divided government. It's not easy because we don't control every lever. And even then, when the Republicans did, it wasn't easy. The Democrats did from 2007 to the beginning of 2011. And you know what? It was pretty easy for them to pass Obamacare. It was pretty easy for them to almost pass cap and trade, which would have devastated our utilities and raised the cost for everybody just to turn on the lights in their home. Mm-hmm. And they passed, a $1 trillion bill that was supposed to lower the unemployment rate that didn't do that. Instead, that debt is on the backs of the next generation.
And let's just talk about that one item for a minute. Now, my understanding that was the $787 billion, and I forget what
stimulus bill.
Stimulus, yes. Mm-hmm. And that was supposed to go to, what was it called? Something ready.
Shovel ready.
Shovel ready programs, right. But it never found any shovel ready programs, or very few of them.
Very few, with the Troy interchange.
Because most of the money actually went to pay firemen, cops, and others at a time when their governments no longer were garnering enough taxes because the economy had collapsed for a while. And so instead of, they just put the whole thing, they put all those guys' wages on a credit card. Well, that's where the $787 billion went.
Well, that would have been a small part. There were a lot of other things that were put in there, like green energy programs that we saw money invested, taxpayer dollars invested in companies like Solyndra that have cost taxpayers billions upon billions. Put it to you this way, that bill was billed as an infrastructure program. Less than 6% of that money was spent on infrastructure.
Exactly.
And now, it was spent on growing government.
You're on the Transportation Committee, and that's a particular interest of this program. We have seen, well, let me just say this. Just this year, 2016, I have driven on the interstate, and I've driven all over the United States. I mean, I've been in every single state, not this year, but over my lifetime.
You didn't drive to Hawaii, did you?
And I've seen no, you're right. Had to fly there. But they have interstates in Hawaii too, which is really interesting, considering the word inter, or the phrase. But I have never seen the roads in the United States in as bad shape as I have in 2016. Whether you're driving to Asheville, North Carolina, or whether you're driving to Rapid City, South Dakota, or to Denver, Colorado, the roads are incredibly bad shape. I saw where they were literally ripping out I-90, I mean, right down to the dirt, and repouring from the beginning. And yet, like Missouri, Interstate 70 from St. Louis to Kansas City, it's just, from what I'm told by the MoDOT director, it's rubble underneath the 2 inches of asphalt.
Yeah.
And I understand you guys recently passed some sort of a transportation bill. Would you like to comment on what that's going to do and the value of it?
Absolutely. This is one of the campaign promises I made in 2012, was to enact a long-term transportation bill. Look, anytime somebody goes to put gas in their car or their truck at a gas station, they're paying a federal gas tax. About 80% of all of the dollars that pay for our construction projects that will slow us down going to the Cardinal games during the summer, about 80% of that comes from your federal gas tax dollars. Mm-hmm. So we have to put together a long-term plan to get those dollars from Washington back to IDOT, because IDOT, the states are the ones who disperse 100% of those dollars. But we got to get them from DC back to the states so that they can plan long-term. They can start looking at major projects like that Troy interchange that can be spent on the annual basis through our formula. We did that first long-term transportation bill in over 10 years. And ironically, I worked for another member of Congress during the last one. So it took 10 years for us to do that. IDOT has their dollars. Now it's up to the state to make sure that they implement their 5-year plan accordingly. And they can now look at not just maintenance. They can look at building long-term projects. And that's really what we need to do in this country, because we shouldn't have to only maintain the existing roadways and those rubble roadways underneath. We ought to start looking ahead. And that's what this bill will allow us to do.
Mm-hmm. And so the Highway Trust Fund, as I understand it, was either bankrupt or near empty. We won't say bankrupt. It was like near empty, because we've been putting in less than we've been taking out for a number of years. What is it that you've done to be able to put more in there so that there's money to disperse to the states?
Well, we used to have to put money from the general fund into the Highway Trust Fund to make up for the shortfall.
Right.
What we did is we didn't think it was the right time to raise gas taxes, because at the federal level, the same time people wanted us to raise the gas tax, the federal government was telling manufacturers to build cars that burn less of it. So it doesn't make sense that that's your funding source if you're forcing people to use less gas. So we created somewhat of a temporary portfolio of funding sources. So we use some tax reform provisions. We have projected to sell off some of the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. Well, I don't necessarily think those would have been my first choices for revenue. It will keep the trust fund solvent for the next 5 years. And that's really what we wanted to make happen. I think long term, we've truly got to look at a portfolio of funding sources. Electric technology and hybrid technology is going to get at the fleet level soon. And when it does, that is going to bankrupt the Highway Trust Fund, because manufacturers will start to manufacture those types of vehicles, and businesses will start to look at the cheaper alternative. And if it's cheaper to buy that electric truck, they're going to do that. So electric vehicles right now pay zero into the Highway Trust Fund. So anybody who drives a fully electric car is a freeloader on the highways. We've got to figure out something, maybe like a registration fee nationally, that can bring them into the mix to help fund the user fees that pay for our maintenance. Those are the types of portfolios that we have to put together in the long term to be able to be reactive to new technologies. You wouldn't invest your 401k in one stock, right? We shouldn't invest the future of our highways and interstate system in one source that the federal government's telling us to use less of. And that's what we've been doing until this bill, when we created some other sources.
We got about 5 minutes left here, but I'm going to say something, you're not going to like it, but then I'd like you to react to it anyways.
I got to go now.
Okay. Those electric vehicles that you're talking about, or your car, or my car, or SUVs, or F-150s, they can run up and down the interstates all day, every day, and they're not going to do nearly the kind of damage that's going to need repair as those big heavy trucks. I mean, you stand on the side of the road and you feel that concrete actually flexing. You're not going to feel that when you and I drive by in our cars. So the question is, why is it that the industry which is doing the most damage to the highways aren't being the ones having to pay the greatest amount in order to rebuild the highways?
They already do, because they burn more fuel. They do pay a majority of the Highway Trust Fund in taxes that come off of diesel usage. That's what scares me in the long term when we see large trucks and more vehicles, will be able to be powered by natural gas, by electric technology, hybrid technology. That's what will break that Highway Trust Fund even sooner. If we didn't have those large trucks, many people whose jobs depend upon the transportation industry wouldn't be able to afford to put gas in their cars to drive up and down the interstate.
Absolutely.
So they're an integral part of our economy, and I want to see more trucks go down the road, more products go into our barge system, which is crucial for the Metro East area, because that shows we've got economic growth. We're selling our products in the global marketplace, and when that happens, jobs right here in Central Illinois are created, because government doesn't create the jobs.
No.
We can hinder that by enacting policies that discourage job creation, or we can actually get out of the way and allow the economy to work.
In like 1 minute, I don't know if you can do it or not, what is the Biotechnology, Horticulture, and Research Committee do?
Well, we have jurisdiction over biotechnology, so GMO labeling came through our committee. Horticulture.
You're the chairman. I'm asking that because you're the chairman of this subcommittee.
Yes, chairman of that subcommittee. We just passed a nationwide standard that's going to avoid, as what Tom Vilsack, the Secretary of Ag, said would be created, which is chaos if a Vermont GMO law went into effect without a national solution. That bill just passed. Horticulture. I got jurisdiction over all the fruits and vegetables in the nation. And we also have jurisdiction over the research title, which is very crucial to Illinois, like the University of Illinois. The agriculture research title helps us to develop new technologies at our research institutions. That's what I do. Was it less than a minute?
It was less than a minute, so we have, I'm going to let you just talk for a little bit to people why they should re-elect you.
Well, I appreciate that. I went to Washington 3.5 years ago saying that I wasn't going to be somebody who's out in the 24-hour news cycle all the time. I wanted to go there to work. I promised that we were going to address infrastructure issues. We passed a long-term water infrastructure bill and a highway infrastructure bill, and we're working on an aviation bill too, to go along with rail infrastructure and others. I talked about wanting to get a farm bill passed so that our farmers had certainty. We did that. I went to Washington to govern, regardless of party, and that's what I intend to do as long as I get sent back.
Perfect. You just came right out on time. Thank you very much for being with us today. We'll have to have you back hopefully before the election and when we're close, and we'll have a better gauge on where you're going.
Looking forward to it.
Thank you. And to the audience, I've been speaking with Congressman Rodney Davis. He's with the 13th Congressional District in Illinois, and we're going to be uploading this to YouTube. So those of you who saw part of this or want to show it to friends, you'll be able to go to YouTube and just look up Conversation with Lee Presser and Rodney Davis, and you will be able to show it to your friends. I want to thank you very much for watching, and we will see you next time.